Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at adding authentication to our application. And primarily we're going to be using Identity Server to deal out tokens. Primarily I'm choosing Identity Server over cookies because in the future I am really hoping to expose this API. So I want to at least lean towards that side of creating access tokens, ID tokens, etc. Okay. So let's get started. First thing that we're gonna need to do is add Identity Server to our application. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull up the NuGet packages menu. I'm just gonna search for Identity Server, and we can grab Identity Server 4. Just grab the latest version. Let's go ahead and add that to our API. Okay, we'll install that. We will also want to be using Identity for our user stores and stuff like that. And for Identity to integrate with Identity Server, there is a specific package for that called the ASP.NET Identity, right? And Identity Server4.ASP.NET Identity. So make sure you grab that package as well, right? So there is two packages here. And let's go ahead and also grab the identity package, right? Because we need that. So identity, we will find it. If not, we will need to look for some like Microsoft identity. Where is this? There we go. So Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity.Entity Framework Core. Again, this is something that we want to add, right? So 3 packages in total: Identity Server, Identity Server Identity, which is basically integration with Microsoft's identity, and then Entity Framework Identity, right? So identity on its own doesn't provide any storage mechanisms with the database. This package does, and I think it has the identity as a dependency on it. Okay, so never mind. We got the 4 packages. Let's go ahead and set this up, right? So we're gonna go into our startup first, and here, what I want to do is, first of all, let's move the controllers down here because of how I'm gonna wire this up. And in the middle here, what I will do is I will create a private void add identity. You can call this whatever you want, whatever is more comfortable. Identity server, identity, authentication, authorization. For me, it's just going to be identity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass iService services into here because I'm just going to need to register a bunch of stuff, right, with my container, and I just want it to be separate, right? So the general pattern that you usually have is you have an extension function. I'm not going to go that far. I'm just going to segregate it in a different function altogether. Okay. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be using a different DB context for my identity. So this DB context is for the tricking library. Usually when I integrate Identity Server and identity, I don't attach the identity DB context to my AppDB context, right? I just use a separate one. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like, right? So we want to add a separate DB context, and we want to add an identity DB context, right? And let's see what it accepts as parameters. The identity DB context by default is configured for identity user, identity role, and string, right? So if we ever need to override these, this is pretty much like, let's see if there is other identity DB context, right? So we can specify a user. So we can override on per user basis, per role, and the key, you know, you get a granularity. So we don't actually need to specify anything because I'm just going to be using identity user, right? So here, let's go ahead and actually configure this. And in the configuration, let's use in-memory database. I'm just gonna call this dev identity. Identity, yeah, oh, didn't need that extra semicolon. What I'm gonna do is drop this down a little bit. I'm gonna hide the menu because I don't really need to see it right now, okay? So we got a place where we're going to be storing user records. The next thing that we want are the services for user manager, like creating users, signing in, so sign in manager and stuff like that. So to have that, we're going to be adding identity, okay? And for what? Identity user and identity role. And that's pretty much it. The next thing to do is these services by default are not wired up to any particular database. So what we have to do is add entity framework stores, and we have to specify what the DB context we're going to be basically connecting it to, okay? On its own, these are just a bunch of services that allow you to create, sign in. In conjunction with the DB context that you're adding, these are now going to be persisted to the database, okay? What I will also do here is I want to specify some options. I don't want to run into this issue before because I created a whole series on authentication, and I feel like this is going to be a bit of a played out tune. If you're really interested in getting this authentication thing down and understanding it at a little bit of a more basic level, I suggest you watch the authentication series. I will try to put it here. Let's see if it will like synchronize, you know. But yeah, basically what I'm doing here is by default in the options, or let's grab the options and we will have the password. If we press F12 here, the password options by default, they will require a digit, they will require an uppercase, they will require a lowercase. I'm not interested in any of that. So for all of these that are like require digit, require length, let's say length is 4, and I think I will need one more. Require digit length, a lowercase, false, and let's just make sure that we are setting them all to false, and we will only do it for the development environment. So unique characters, I think that's the only one that we don't need. Uppercase and non-alphanumeric, right? So actually have this on my clipboard, so false, false, okay. This is just so I can use password as password for my development environment. I can't be bothered remembering any passwords more than I already am. So to alleviate that pressure from myself, I'm just gonna use password, okay? And I recommend that you do so as well. For this, what we'll need to do is we'll need to grab the iWeb hosting environment. Let's go ahead, grab it here, delete the comma on there, on the end, and right below the constant here, we will inject it into the constructor of the startup, and we will create a field here, right, which can then be consumed throughout our startup. Right, easy peasy. If we need to configure something here for development, production, we can do so as well. And for example, I think the main one that we will do is not this one, but the video manager. We'll hide that behind an interface. We'll create one for production, and we will create one for development. So development will kind of integrate with your local environment. Production will integrate with the production S3 bucket, right? So if environment is development, there we go, right? Not too hard. Else we'll do a to-do configure for production. Or I think actually, let's take a look at the default options again. Do we need to configure anything, or can we leave it as is? Required length 6. I think using unique characters isn't actually contributing to having the password more secured. Like longer passwords are generally more secured. So I think in the spirit of that, I will require 8 characters at least, and remove stuff like non-alphanumerics, but we'll configure that later. I don't think I will stress about it too much right now. So this is the identity part. So these are our user records and storing it in the database. Next thing, we want the identity server layer. So that part basically brings the pages, or rather the endpoints, like the discovery endpoint where we can see all the other URLs, where we can retrieve the tokens from, where we can get the user information, etc. Right? So on our services, let's go ahead and add identity server, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to have an identity server builder that we're going to store it into, because again, we want to configure it differently for our development environment compared to our production environment. So production environment is going to be integrated a little bit more tightly to the database, where we're actually going to be storing stuff in the database. This one is going to be a little bit looser and storing it in memory, like so, okay? So if environment is development, let's go ahead, grab our identity server builder. And what we're going to do is we're going to add two things. We're going to add identity resources, and we're going to be adding clients, right? So the client is our JavaScript Nuxt.js client essentially, and identity resources are identity resources. Resources is data, it's some kind of information. Identity, well, we're adding identity, it's a way to represent a user, right? So it's information about a user. So in memory, identity resources. Here, what we provide is a new list of identity resources, and we can use some constants that, the identity server actually provides us with. So identity resources, I think it is. Let's go take a look in here. And here we'll have OpenID and profile. So these two are generally, OpenID is to use the OpenID Connect flow, right? If you want to know more about that, again, I recommend to watch my authentication series. And profile is, again, just your information about the user. And what these scopes do exactly, again, you can open up the OpenID Connect specification and Google for these, right? And look for those in there. So I'm going to leave a link for that in the description. I highly recommend you go and read the OpenID Connect specification to understand what OpenID Connect is about and how it works, okay? So here what we want to do is we want to new up an OpenID Connect client, right? And the profile, sorry, not client. These are scopes that you can essentially request, right? So you're going to request a scope, and scope is like an area, right? It's a quantifiable amount, right? If there is like information about me, I have address information, and I have a profile image information, right? So the scope is the area. What kind of information do you want? Do you want my address information? Or do you want my sort of social media information? Or do you want my private information? I don't know, like passwords, or you don't really give out passwords, but hope you get it. Scope is what type, like the area of information, the category of information. What category of information do you want to extract? So that's that. Now we specify a client. So the client is going to be the thing that is receiving the tokens that are going to contain the information. And the way that this client gets configured on the identity server side will either allow the client to request these scopes or not, okay? And we'll see this in a second. So identity server builder, and by the way, I'm going to mention this again towards the end of the video. This is about authentication. And if you don't know the difference between authorization and authentication is who are you, and authorization is are you allowed, okay? So those are the two questions each individual one answers. So the part that we're setting up here is only around authentication. Next thing we want is the clients, right? So we want to add a client. Let's go ahead and get a new array in here. And there's going to be a few things in here. So let's go ahead and get a new client, right? And first things first, again, not really again, but let's just set the client ID. So this is going to be a Next.js app. We can call it web client the same way that our application is called here. So web client, right? Just pop the client ID on there. And next thing that we want is we want to set some URLs, right? Where is the authentication request going to come in from? Where is it going to end? Like, where do we need to return, etc.? Are we allowing certain course origins and stuff like that? This is the kind of stuff that we need to specify. So let's, redirect URI. Where do we redirect after they log in, right? So for us, it will be localhost 5000. And this actually needs to be a new, I think I can just make it a string array. Oh, and put it on the end there. Okay, and I don't actually need the string. It can just be an array. Okay, so the array there. Cool. So the reason I need 3 of these is that there's going to be a post logout redirect URI. So when you log out, where can you end up? And after you authenticate. So the first one is you authenticate, where do you go? Next one is you log out, where do you go? Third one is course origins, right? So because people are going to be coming from a different domain to authenticate, you need to specify a course origin. So this is just so we basically say, right, we're actually expecting authentication from this guy, right? And then this is something that we can validate. And our next application actually sits on port 3000. So let's amend this a little bit. And now the part that we want to specify is how is our application going to authenticate. So let's go ahead and say grant, allowed grant types. So grant types, and we want to grab the code flow. So again, if you want to know about code flow, watch my authentication series for more details, right? Here, all that is going to happen is we are going to go to the identity server to authenticate. We're going to come back with a code. And once we're on the client in our browser, once we get our web application, right, our Nuxt.js application, in the URL, we're going to have a code. Again, we're going to take a look at this. And it's going to go ahead and request some tokens, okay, and the user information. So allowed grant types, and now we just have to set a few flags that will essentially, make this process a little bit more secure and get rid of some stuff that we don't need. So require PKC, we want to set this to true, and this is just to actually allow code flow through the browser, okay? Next thing, we want to look for browser, so allows tokens via browser. So this is again to allow the tokens to be passed in the browser URL, okay? Next thing we want is look for consent, require consent. We'll set this to false. So consent, I don't know if you've ever used auth authentication, but generally when you redirect to Facebook or Google or GitHub to get authenticated with a third-party app, GitHub will say, do you allow this app to grab your email information, etc. Right? This is that consent screen. We turn it off. It's pretty much one ecosystem, right? So for this client, I know all the information that it's gonna grab. It's gonna need it, so I don't need a consent screen. If there is gonna be a third-party client that wants to come and authenticate with this, that's when we want a consent screen, and that's when we want to tell the user, this is the information that it's trying to grab. Do you want to allow this? Okay. And the last bit is require client secret to false. So our client cannot hold a secret because it is located in the user's browser. So anything that goes to your browser or the mobile application world, you don't put any secrets there. Okay. So we just say this client does not need a secret. And for now, I think this is more or less it. If we encounter errors, again, this is something that we can fix. So this is our development configuration. For our baseline configuration, what we actually need to do is we need to tell the identity server to hook into or hook up with identity, right? Identity, entity framework, identity server is like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. You just gotta, put all that stuff together. So we have to add ASP.NET identity, and in here you can always check the type that you need to provide, user. So what kind of user are we expecting to work with? You can grab one from here, put it here, no problem. Another thing that we need are signing tokens. So if you don't know anything about Jupyter, go watch my authentication series, right? We're gonna have signing credentials. These are the things, or rather, developer signing credentials later. And this is actually probably we want this in development side. So identity builder. There we go. JWTs have signatures. In order to create a signature, we need some secure keys. This is this part. Okay. These are all the services. These are classes and stuff that is going to get injected into middleware to figure out, is this user authenticated? Is this guy who he say he is? It's going to add routes to and basically generate tokens and stuff like that, right? We actually need to catch all that stuff. So let's go ahead and say app. And we'll do use authentication. And then we'll do app. And add use identity server. Okay. So again, so only the authentication part. Authorization goes here, right? We're not there yet. We just want to show a token. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add Razor pages to actually redirect to our API, server login page, and then login. Okay. So let's go ahead, services, add Razor pages, and let's put this up all the way here along with the controllers. Okay. This stuff here, I feel like we can go full hipster mode and fix it up, you know. It needs a helping hand, so, you know, be kind to your code. Okay, so we got Razor pages. One thing I always forget, do not forget it. Once you add Razor pages, go down to the endpoints and also map the Razor pages routes, right? Endpoints, type in Razor pages. I always forget that it's also spelled with O, but we essentially map the pages route. So now we can actually use these, right? So in here, in our tracking library, let's go ahead, add a directory. We'll call it pages. In the pages, we can go ahead, add another directory. You can put these really wherever you want, but I'm just gonna follow sort of a pattern that is well known. And the page, let's go ahead. What do I want to call this? We are trying to log in here, right? So we're gonna get a Razor page with the backend. This is where we're going to be trying to sign in. This part is really a little bit over the top. We don't need all of this. Let's go ahead, just get a form in here. Action, we don't need the action. And all I want to do is have a method in here, and we're gonna have a post. Now, there is gonna be stuff that we will need. So like to basically do some model binding, and I actually want to have that in here. So let's add a directory. We'll call it shared. And then here, what this will allow us to do is then give us some options for a layout, view start, view imports. I want to just get a view imports in here. And the using statement doesn't really matter. What does matter is the add tag helper. And all we're saying here is we're saying grab all the tag helpers. So with the star, we grab the tag helpers, and this is after typing this out for like the 100th time, you are gonna get used to it. So Microsoft, ASP, net core, MVC, tag helpers. Okay, so you save that. This now allows you to use tag helpers. So if we go back to the login and we go down here, we specify the input. We can now use maybe, okay, so this is, I don't know why it only allows you to create it in the shared, because you actually want to take it out of the shared, right? And put it here. And now you still don't get it. So just had to save the file. Okay, but never mind. So yeah, here we can essentially now get access to ASP dash. So make sure you got the tag helpers here, and then the shared, we'll keep it because we're going to put some other stuff there. But for now, just make sure you have the view imports outside the shared, and you should be good. So ASP4, and here we need to specify what this input is for. So let's go ahead into our, I will close this now, and login CS.html, right? So this file. And in here, what I will do is I'll just create a public class login form. And in here, we're going to have a string username. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to say password. I'm going to say that this is required, right? We're going to have a little bit of authentication. We're civilized people. And then also we can have a data type. data type, which is password. I'm just gonna generate some stuff on our CSHTML. Don't ask me in the comments how this tag generation works. Go look it up. Okay, I'm not gonna explain it. Another thing you can get an idea of it is basically take a look at the take a look at the DOM tree. Take a look at what gets generated. Okay, so now we want to essentially bind this to this, right? So we actually need a container first to kind of hold this form. So let's go ahead and create a login form. And we'll create the form here, get set, and make sure to say bind property. Okay, so what bind property does is it allows you to use the form like so, right? Usually you would have to grab it from at model like this and then go to form if you want to display something or render something. Here you can just go ahead straight to the form, capture the username. Here we want to capture the password. We'll put some spans for where we can do ASP validation form, username, same thing on the end here, but for password. Okay, and then we can have a button. Nope, not a but a button. Sign in, and this is actually just going to be type submit, right? So we actually just want to be able to submit this form. So the onGet, I don't think it's really needed here, but I'm going to keep it. What we really want to do is we want to be able to post this form now. Now, because of bind property, it's actually going to get bound here. So how we usually put a from body in the MVC controller, we don't need to do that here. Let's get an action result here, and we will do on post async. And this will need to be an asynchronous method because we actually want to be able to sign in, right? And we're going to be using the sign-in manager and stuff like that. So in here, I'm going to be using from services. So from if how we go into controller, I don't know if I use this anywhere else here, I already forgot. But how we do dependency injection in the constructor here, this is exactly the same. We're doing dependency injection, but from services allows us to do it at per method level. The same thing can be achieved in the controllers, okay? So sign in manager, for what kind of user are we going to be signing in? Identity user, right? So sign in manager, and again, I think I already said it, but now that you're actually seeing it, the sign in manager is a service and it comes from our startup, the add identity, right? So this is the part which is actually giving us the sign in manager that we can use, okay? So sign in, actually, let's start it like this. So sign in manager, we're going to sign in with, or sign in password or password sign in async. There we go. Just gonna put it in the right order. And then we're going to use form and username. And again, if you want to know the signature of this, you can press F12 and you're going to get a couple of options. And you can either supply the identity user and password. We can just do username, password. And then I'm just going to put true and false. So lockout is false, which means multiple invalid signing attempts. We're not going to do anything. It's persistent true. That means if I close the browser and open it again, the cookie is going to stay there. Okay. So let's go ahead and wait on this, and we're going to grab the sign-in result. Okay. So there it is. Let me drop this down so it's kind of on one line. So in the sign-in results, in the sign-in result, let's go ahead and see if this has succeeded. So if this has succeeded, we want to pop the user back to where he came from. So this is something that is actually going to be present on the login form. This is something that we need to have here. So public string return URL. So the return URL is going to be here. It's going to be populated by the identity server and authorization endpoint. Again, I probably said this like already 4 times. Go watch my identity server series. And yeah, when we display the form return URL, this is something that we actually want to set. And probably if this is empty, we want to pop an error or something like that, but it's probably going to error regardless. So we want to return page here. All right, so we just return the page as is. If we can also check if model state is valid. So if it's not valid, let's go ahead and return the page again. Return page. Yep. So if the login form that we're submitting isn't valid, go back. If you've didn't have a successful login attempt, go back to the page, and otherwise, let's go ahead back to our application, right? So this is where on the form we want to use the return URL, and in order not to lose the return URL between here and here, we actually need to make it as part of our form. So this is where we do type hidden. So this input field is not going to be seen, but it's going to be for the return URL. And to avoid any bad forms of bad luck, make sure you set the value. Sure, you might think, oh, we set it on the form in the original object. No, actually make sure you set this thing, okay? Another thing to avoid is a null reference exception here. So let's go ahead and just say new login form here, okay? So once this gets created, this is going to get set, and it's probably better to set this form here, okay? And let's actually pop the return URL in there as well. So now that we have the login page, let's go ahead and make sure that when we hit an authorized endpoint somewhere on our API, it goes ahead and redirects us to this login form. So this will be in our startup, the identity implementation. If we go in here, you will see that it adds a cookie. It basically configures a bunch of cookie authentication, and primarily what we want to do is we want to override that. So in here, in services, we're going to add configure, or rather instead of add, we'll configure application cookie. We can have config here, and in this config, specifically what we want to do is we want to go to the cookie, and actually no, not the cookie, specifically to the login path. And on the login path, we will set the account/login. So that's our current login path. Again, if you've named it to something else, this is how you set it to be the target of where you're going to get pointed if you're going to hit an authorized endpoint and you're not logged in. So another thing that I'm seeing here that I forgot to add is add default token providers. So what the default token provider is essentially like a key that is going to be used to when you're generating passwords and when you're generating email verification codes and stuff like password reset codes. So essentially, if you have two applications and they generate the same, and you log in or you register with the same password, the outcome of the thing that's the hash generated in the database will be different, and that's basically this bit here. So now that we're pointing to the login place, right? We actually need something to sign in with. For this, let's go into Program CS. We're gonna scroll up all the way up here, and what we're going to do is we're gonna grab the user manager service. So user manager, and for the type of user, again, you probably already know this, identity user. And while we're in development, accidentally popped the region in here. Let's go ahead and create a user, new identity user. Name will be test, and then we want to use the user manager. And it will be probably worth it just to grab it and put it here, because we're kind of using it in this space rather than instantiating there and using it there. But we're essentially keep your code together, the stuff that's relevant, right? So here we want to call create a sync, and we can just pop the user in here, and then we supply the password. Okay, so if I want to log in on the login page, I specify test and password. Right? Pretty self-explanatory. So this method is not asynchronous, it's static void. This is async, so this returns a task. What we want to do is call getAwaiter and get result. This way, if an exception is thrown here, we are able to catch that exception as well. But for now, this will be it here. Let's go ahead and verify that we can actually log in. So I'm going to open up the terminal here and I'm going to actually type in .NET run. So if you had your application running and you are installing a bunch of packages, it is actually going to need a restart. So that's when you stop your application and you start it again. Okay. So after that has started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto the HTTPS site, because the problem that we're going to have is if we are going to be on HTTP, Google is not actually going to save the authentication cookie. And that's a problem we're going to solve later. But essentially for now, we'll use just HTTPS to test this. And then with another, we'll carry on with another browser until we get certificates in. Okay. So account/login. There is our simple page. So the thing that I'm looking out for is the authentication cookie, right? So the two cookies that we have here, the consent, I think that's something else. So let's go ahead and clear, because again, I reuse the localhost domain. You might have other cookies there as well. So just clear the cookies, refresh, and you're going to have a bunch of other cookies in there, right? Or like clear them. So we only work with one cookie. So anti-forgery cookie, this means that you are on this domain, or you requested this form from this domain, and this anti-forgery cookie, I think if we go to the network, we can see that's been placed here, and essentially then it's read into the cookie section to basically, it's security, extra security. All right, watch my authentication series. I don't actually think I explained that there, but anyway, test, password. I don't think I've authenticated. If we refresh, let's go ahead and check out what happens. So what I will do is I will do an attach. So you probably already seen me do this. So Ctrl-Alt-F5 for me. Attach to process. I'm just waiting for a window to pop up here, and I can attach to this application process. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for trackingLibrary.api. This is going to attach to the process. We're going to go back here. And for this process right here, what we can do is just put a breakpoint and see what's missing. Okay. So again, same as before, maybe I just typed in the password wrong. It looks like we're not reaching that place. So let's go ahead and put an F9 here. And I get a feeling the return URL is, or it's breaking because the return URL is null. So on the form, yeah, the return URL is null. So we can actually try to go around this. So if we go in the elements and we see the hidden input form here, the value right there, let's go ahead and do test here. Okay. So a little bit of a hacky way, but for a temporary solution, it will do. So sign in. We get past, succeeded. We're going to try to go to test URL. And obviously we don't have this URL, so a little bit of a fail, but now we actually have the identity and identity server cookies in here. So authentication is working and the identity server part is set up. Okay. I will close the application here and we will stop the episode here because I don't want this to become too long. In the next episode, we are going to set up the OIDC client for our Nuxt.js application. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, please make sure that you check out my authentication series playlist for anything that you might have already questions for. I've detailed authentication in great detail there. Check the description for the playlist. See the episodes. Anything that catches your eye, watch it. Okay? Other than that, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. If you really enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe. I stream on Wednesdays and Sundays, so join me if you're into that kind of thing. Don't forget to join my Discord server and be part of the community, the raw coding community. And hopefully, I'll see you in my next episode. Bye-bye.